I'm working on a writing book, a second one. This one's called, my working title is Make Your Memoir Suck Less.
That was writer and former Chronicle columnist Adair Lara. I'm Jeff, and this is Storied San Francisco. Every week on this podcast, we feature musicians, bartenders, journalists, writers, and other San Franciscans talking about living, working, and doing their thing here. It's a way to get to know your neighbors. Welcome to episode 34, part 2. In part 1, Adair talked about the Victorian home in Duboce Triangle that she's lived in since 1973. In this podcast, she shares the story of how she got started writing a column for the San Francisco Chronicle in 1989. There's even a little story about Herb Caen weaved in. Here's Adair.
And that started when, I think it really started when I met Nene McCabe. She was Charles McCabe's daughter. And he had recently, I think it was recently, died and been found dead in his Telegraph Hill apartment. And this is where she was living. You know, it's the kind of apartment where the landlord's weeping outside because hoping that somebody will eventually die. And he did, so I don't know how that worked. But in any case, Nene McCabe, and we had a writing club called Daughters of Irish Alcoholics.
Is there an acronym for that? Daughters of
DIA.
Irish.
The DIA club. And her father was the famous curmudgeon Charles McCabe. Now, what did he drink? Was it called the Green Death? It was always at this bar, I think, called the Cafe Spore. No, that doesn't sound right. People who
over in
know
North Beach, or
definitely in North Beach.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we, it's just a writing club where you exchange writing. But at about this time, I was starting to send those pieces into the Sunday Punch, which was the Sunday paper of the San Francisco Chronicle.
Okay.
Right, and they were appearing these little, just sort of short humor pieces. And the features editor then was named Rosalie Wright, and I started running into her at places, events of various kinds, and she liked my writing. And that led that summer, I was working for magazines then, to her asking me to do 10 sample columns with the idea of writing a column for the Chronicle. This is terribly exciting to me, right? And I produced 10 columns, which I produced to have, I pretended to have just whipped off, right? Like, I wasn't busy last night. Here were 3 of them. But actually, had been things I'd had lying around for years and were now, I took time off from my magazine job to work on them, that sort of thing, and gave them to her in, I guess, late June that year. This is 1989.
Okay.
And she turned them over to her superiors. The editor of the Chronicle then was a man named Bill German.
Okay.
But no, she never heard anything, and I never heard anything. And months went on, and German was, visiting the Appalachians of France or something. Everybody was gone. And so, you know how you do. I sent a letter saying that I'd had other offers, right? Which was completely a lie.
Yeah. I'm busy.
Well,
Yeah.
But if they like you, they usually believe that you had other offers. And I said that if by the end of the summer I hadn't heard anything, I would just view this as not happening, right? And I swear to God, August 31st at 5 p.m., they called me into the office and hired me.
Nice.
And Bill German was then 72. If you'd been around San Francisco very long, you would know this editor. And I said, what do you want me to write about? And he said, just write about your life, which was, nobody was doing that then. This was called a personal column. I'm not sure we even had that name. But there wasn't this kind of column before, not really. I mean, various people who had produced what are called personal columns about their lives would say that a person has 6 or 7 of those columns in them for a lifetime, this kind of stuff. But it's what I did. So they hired me, and I was just completely thrilled. I'd just broken up with this guy named Neil, and I had to sort of start going with him again so I could tell him. You know? But I was terrified. There had been an earlier columnist who had actually taken out, I heard this, ads on buses asking people for ideas for his column.
Oh my goodness.
And I naturally remember all the time it took me to actually write the columns that got me hired. And so I thought, well, at that pace, I could produce, 5 a year.
Right.
And it was supposed to be twice a week, every Tuesday and Thursday.
Wow.
This was, we called it Folsom Prison, I think it was, but it was Folsom and Fifth. This is an extra adjunct building right down from the Chronicle, which was at Fifth and Mission.
The Mission.
Yeah, and so we're down there. The columnists were there, like Alan Temko, who was architecture, and Jerry Nachman, John Carroll worked at home, and Steve Rubenstein worked at the main plant. I loved all these words. Like you would go down to the paper, you would go down to the plant, or you would file. I love the word file.
Yeah.
File this.
Yeah.
See, I came in sideways. People in journalism worked their way up to this, but I came in kind of sideways, so all the words completely thrilled me. And they were still producing the paper in the building then.
The press was there?
The press was there.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, I started doing it, and I'd naturally assumed this would be something you did for a few months, but it went on for 12 years.
Wow.
Yeah, 12 years. And it was kind of this wonderful privilege. There were 2 holes in the paper, and they just left it to me to fill them.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, there were people who didn't understand this. Remember, this writing about yourself hadn't really hit the zeitgeist yet. And people would send me copies of my column with all the I's and me's circled in red, to let me know I was doing it again.
Right.
But the funny thing was that if you wrote a column, it was never about you. It was about, who was it? Philip Lopate, I think, who said that, I write about myself, about how the world comes at me because I think of that's how it comes at everyone. And Jung said, which I never forgot, he said that which is most personal is most common. This is the odd thing about writing, that the more personal you are, the more universal it is, the more you give people to identify with. Right? So so I really wasn't allowed to write about anything except I had to write about my own life. I wrote about my kids, about my dad, who was living in a truck in the desert by then. Sometimes current events.
I was going to ask about current events.
Sometimes, but
still your experiences.
Still mine.
But
like when the '89 earthquake, I was only 2 months into the column, and I didn't even go and walk around. I mean, I had experiences at home. Everybody was huddled. I was, listening to the ball game like everybody else, but trying to figure out where to die in the living room or in the yard.
Right.
But it didn't occur to me that I was a journalist and that I should go out. I should go abroad. I should go through the streets. Anyways, dumb stuff like that.
It was an earthquake, also.
It was an earthquake.
Were you rattled?
But I didn't have it. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, it was the biggest earthquake I'd been through, or before or since.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a big earthquake.
Very big.
It went on for 2-3 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on the phone to my mother. There was this epic game at the ballpark, and everybody was listening to it. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at the sliding glass patio door in the apartment I'm living next door to here. And I'm thinking, does that count as going? Because then they would say you have to go in a doorway, and I think there's a sliding glass door. Does that count? If I go outside, will it let things fall on me, or do I stay in? Anyway, not clued in. Luckily, it stopped. But and then when I met Bill, which was a year after I'd had the column,
90 maybe.
Yeah, I got the column in '89. I met him in November 1990.
Okay.
We got married in November of 1991.
Okay.
But he knew all about me, He worked for Chronicle Books, which was also in the same building.
Oh.
So I had a
little bit of history there.
Yeah, I had a very clever opening line. I said, "Do you work in the building?" Because he got in the elevator with me. And nobody could come into that building if they didn't work there. It was a good line anyway.
Right. Yeah.
And for years, I told everybody that he made the first move and said, "My happiness depends on knowing your name." But, I don't think he said that. Anyway.
But he read your column?
He knew the column, yeah. The column had become kind of popular.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when the first time I wrote a column about him, the first of many, I said, "What do you want to be called?" Because the previous guy had been named, never mind what his name, but anyway, he was called Neil. And Bill says, "I want to be called Bill." So he was afterward, people would say, "That Bill, you're that Bill." Anyway, it went on for really astonishingly for 10 years. And it's kind of a lot of a pressure because, you have to go through your life kind of regarding yourself in the back of your head with this recording voice. Can this be a column? And a column is anything that, usually the bad moments, Who was it? Was it Joan Didion said, "Writing is turning your worst moments into money." But you want that because it kind of rocks you back on yourself. It makes you think. And also it produces a sympathetic column. And they were mostly, not always, but mostly humor columns.
Well, and I feel like we learn more from those things, from disaster or bad things.
I think so, yeah. And also
when things are good, we just enjoy them. We don't turn our brains off.
You can't write about good things at all. You can't write about happiness for more than 2 sentences. Nobody's going to put up with that.
We're bored.
Yeah, in fact, later on, late in the column, we bought a secondhand Lexus, this really old one, and mentioned that we had gone to Bali on vacation, and this guy calls up and said, "You went to Bali, you yuppie scum." Because you establish a persona in the column, and my persona was, everybody imagines you differently. They didn't have pictures then.
Sure.
And I don't think they should have now because people have their own ideas. And people would say, "I imagine you as 5 feet tall with Birkenstocks and your hair sitting in the middle." And everybody would have their own idea of what you looked like. And they should have their own idea.
Leave something to the imagination.
Well, also, they're going from the voice that you establish. And they don't want that trifled with.
Right.
I remember the first time I saw John Carroll, I was so shocked because I'd associated a different image with the voice in the column. And anyway, it was kind of a wonderful way to live. I really only had to do 2 columns a week, but that means you have to throw out a lot. I remember the first time I went on vacation, and my mother said, "A vacation from what?" I talked about the kids a lot, and
by name, or did you?
By name.
Yeah.
They were little. And the first time I was going to write a column about Patrick. He had fallen in love. He was always falling in love in those days. He was 5 or 6. And he fell in love with a little girl in his class named Una. And I said, "Can I write about this?" And I showed it to him. And he said, "No, you can't write about that." And I said, "What if I gave you $20? So that was the deal for years, really. If the column was largely about them, it was $20. I never raised it because I didn't want it to overwhelm their judgment.
Sure. But you learned the hustle. You learned the hustle of being a columnist.
And here's the interesting thing. Patrick, who's been a writer in New York, he writes for the New Yorker and he writes for the New York Times, and he's been writing for Vice News.
What's his last name?
He's got a sort of a pen name, Heij. If you go Patrick High, you'll see him.
A version of Jim's.
Yeah, Jim spelled it Heig.
G. Okay.
Yeah. And so
Patrick High.
He's coming home, but he's toying with the idea of asking the Chronicle about a column.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that fun? He would be way overqualified in a way, because but on the other hand, he regarded as a real challenge, and he was just reading my little collections of columns. It's so funny because now he's a grown-up man and a fellow writer, and he's reading them in quite a different way.
Yeah.
So That would be kind of fun. Yeah. Anyway, I kept that column until 2004 when there was a big to-do. People who know the newspaper history know about that. The Examiner and the Chronicle merged,
Mm-hmm.
and the union was broken, and a lot of people went away.
Mm-hmm.
I took a buyout at that time.
Okay.
Yeah. Kept the rights to my columns. And now most of the people, almost all of the people our friends there still, Leah Garchick and so forth. But
Oh, yeah, I was going to ask you if you knew Leah.
Oh, yeah, she just lives around the corner. She's really just a warm person. Everybody loves Leah. Yeah. The trouble was I worked at home, and so I wasn't, until after they took the column away in this big shake-up, I was sent to work in the home and garden department, which I thought was, this is when they want you to quit.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go in there with these big boards with different kinds of paint on them and carry them around in the office and say, "What do you like?" Because I was trying to get at them, and I put all these ferns on my desk. But, the Chronicle's been around since 1852.
Right.
And I think it's done better than some other papers because of the fast money coming into San Francisco with the .com. And that doesn't hurt. So it's nice. We still have the hometown paper.
Yes.
Used to be called the Comical. Well, it was known for great voices. It was known for columnists. This was especially, like in the late 60s where they would have headlines like Great City Forced to... Or was that New York? Great City Forced to Drink Swill. I think that was the New York Times. Now that I think about it. But we did things like that. We had great ones like that.
Yeah. Did you know Herb Caen?
Oh, yeah.
Did your work overlap? I forget when he...
It didn't, but he was one of those people. Early when I came on the Chronicle, he would say, "Well, I guess this is the time for me to step aside." Well, people talk about their buttons and their shirts and so forth, and it was a direct dig at me.
Yeah.
But he came around. We were in the same. There was a round table, a literary round table. We were both in, so I'd see him at these lunches.
Yeah.
And he was amazing. He was just indefatigable. He went out every night. And I used to think, well, who are you going to run into when you go out? Herb Caen? Maybe you'll see Herb Caen. But he is. But he gave the voice to the city. A city has to have a persona, a sense of itself. And he really did that all by himself, with this Baghdad by the Bay and this sense of insufferable smugness we've all had ever since about belonging to the city.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of gave that to the city. I wish there was somebody like that at the Chronicle again to speak for the city.
Do you think it's something he tapped into?
I think it's something he invented.
Do you think he invented it? Okay.
I think he gave the city... San Francisco's always had personality, from the Barbary Coast to the Gold Rush to this iconoclastic counterculture of the 60s. We've shipped our counterculture to the East Bay and beyond now, but
yes.
But we've always, and now we're frankly a city of the rich, but but there was always these very decided views of San Francisco, but he kind of it was all his own, the way he talked about San Francisco, and it made his column this must-read. Little bold-faced names and so forth. It was quite an achievement. He was this guy from Sacramento. So it really was a loss, and he wrote it until he died.
Adair's book, Naked, Drunk, and Writing, Shed Your Inhibitions and Craft a Compelling Memoir or Personal Essay, is available wherever you buy books. We recorded this podcast at Adair's home in May 2018. Music for the podcast is by Otis McDonald, a.k.a. Joe Bigale. Film photography for this episode is by Michelle Kilfeather. Please follow Storied San Francisco on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All 34 episodes and Michelle's photos of storytellers are up on the website, which is storiedsf.com. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, please rate and review the show. Send your comments and suggestions to storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Check back next week when we'll hear from third-generation San Franciscan and 100-year-old Alice Murphy.